Okay, welcome to the first session of distance learning for Econ HMP 642. Looks like this will be the method we'll be using at least for the foreseeable future. We'll give it a try. Um, as I said, so most of you are in finance. So I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here, but there are a handful of you who are not in finance. So I have to say this again. We're going to give Zoom a try. See how it works. Um, and if it doesn't, if you guys, I'll probably ask you after class on Wednesday to, give me some feedback on how this is going. And if you don't like it, I can try to switch to more of an asynchronous format, which would mean like I record a short video and then I give you some problems to do, and then I give you another video, that kind of thing. I've never done asynchronous teaching, so uh, not comfortable with it particularly, but we have to make adjustments as due. So I've got a few other announcements that I want to go over before we get going. Um, uh, Importantly, I want to talk to the HMP students at the end of the lecture. Um, so just briefly about internship stuff. So I'll stop at some, hopefully before 5, I'll stop. And those of you who are not HMP students can drop off. And I've got a few announcements. It's nothing earth shaking, but I want to talk to you just for a minute about that. Okay. So I think I said this in my email, but I would say as long as we're doing the synchronous, meaning live videos, I would really encourage you to do your best to attend via Zoom and be here live. My intention is to record the lecture, which I'm going to shut off my email. Rude of me. The intent right now is to record the lecture, so you can probably see, I think you can see that I'm recording. So I am actively recording now. And so my intent is to record the lecture, put it on YouTube as a private video, and then put the link in the chapter 11 module. So you'll be able to go back and listen to the lecture after the fact. So if we do continue to do this synchronous teaching style, I will try to record each lecture, post it to Canvas, so that if for some reason you can't be online live with me, then you can watch it after. I would really recommend that you do your best to try to attend the live lectures as long as we're doing it. It's good. The lesson I've learned is when things kind of get crazy, you really want to try to fall back on as much routine as you can. It really does you good, right? It's good for your mental health. So do try to come. And the other piece of that is, I find people don't actually watch recorded lectures, or they say they're going to and then they don't. So you don't want to miss out. I'm going to try to, as usual, try to give you as much value in this time as I possibly can. Okay, I have made some. All right, so that's that about the lecture style. I reviewed the syllabus last night and made some modest modifications to the schedule. We're pretty much on track with where I'd hoped to be. I've eliminated one chapter so that I could have a little more time with, I think it's chapter 13, which is a complicated chapter, kind of like chapter 11. So I'm giving myself an extra session on 13. So you do want to, I posted the modified schedule, so you should be able to, you want to go in and check that because the exam schedule is also slightly changed. Speaking of exams, the exams will now be online. So I'll be giving you a Canvas-based exam, and we'll just hope that works well. I do owe you some practice problems. So I've just been very busy over the break and haven't had a chance to sit down and write them. So I'm going to try to do that in the next couple of days to go back through and write questions the way that I would think I would want to write exam questions based on the lectures and the book. Uh, I have posted a couple of videos. So chapter 11's got some, we have covered in class some material that is not in the book. So specifically, I taught you how to find the marginal cost by doing a derivative. So I did that in class over the course of Monday and Wednesday's lectures. I realized some of you missed, particularly a lot of you missed Monday's class. Some of you missed Wednesday's class. So I have recorded a video going over how to find the marginal cost if you're given um, a quadratic equation, a increasing total cost curve. It's pretty straightforward, but if you didn't go to class, you would probably get lost. So I've recorded 2 lectures, one on how to find the marginal cost, the other on how to find the profit maximizing quantity, as well as how to find the maximum profit. And then I have recorded, or rather created 2 problem sets online so that you can practice those 2 skills. Uh, if you've watched the videos and you're still having trouble with that, I'm happy to do office hours to practice doing these with you and kind of going over them. Okay. I'll also try, given the circumstances, I will also try to continue to record some short videos, to when we do something that it seems kind of technical and complicated, so that you'll have that as a reference. Um, I am happy to do office hours by Zoom. I don't have a set, at this point. I was doing office hours on Thursdays. Um, I'm not going to do that now, or at least I don't know if there is a desire for me to do that. I'm happy to do it. But right now, I'm not planning to do that. So if you'd like to chat about the class, about internships, anything like that, just shoot me a note and I'll send you and we can set up a time to visit. Okay, so rules of engagement while we're in class. I think this worked fairly well in finance. So I think all of you have your cameras off, so that doesn't give me a lot of feedback. You're welcome to turn your camera. I would like you to mute your microphones. I've muted you all from my end right now, but if you would like to ask a question orally, feel free to do so. You just need to unmute to do that. Um, and so happy to have you jump in and ask a question. And also feel free to turn your camera on. That actually provides me some feedback, because if I can see your eyeballs and you're nodding along, which is what I usually look for in class, that's useful feedback to me. But if you're not going to do that, what I'd like to do is I'm going to use the chat function. So again, I know some of you, we did this already in finance, but some of you were not there. So there's a chat function. If you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you see the mute button is on the far left. If you kind of go across, you see stop video, which most of you have found, obviously. If you go across, you'll see a button for chat. If you click on that, you can just type in, hello class, right? And it'll show up and I will be able to see that. So what I would encourage you to do is, if you've got a question for me or you're not understanding something, throw a question mark up, something like, you could just do that. And I will eventually see that. I was working with Excel during the finance class, and a couple of people, wrote a comment to say, hey, can you zoom it in some? It doesn't make any noise for me, so I may not see it right away. So if I'm doing something like I've got the wrong camera on or something like that, you can unmute and say, hey, Professor Bonica, you're all jacked up, so just feel free to do that so that I know, so that I get some feedback, and and if you're getting it, I may pause and ask, hey, does this make sense? You can just throw me a smiley face, right? So or some other emoji. You guys are better at that stuff than I am. So just to give me some feedback so that I know you're listening. Okay. Um, so Andre, I'm going to talk to the internship stuff at the end. So we'll come back to that. Okay. So end of the class, we're going to pause. I'm going to dismiss everybody who's not HMP, and I'd like to talk to the HMP students about internships. All right. So questions about any of kind of the administrative stuff? All right. There is a little bit of a delay when you hit the chat button. So I may not see it right away. Again, if you've got an immediate question or you want to stop me because I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, just unmute and say, "Hey, Professor Bonnick, I got a quick question," and I'll be fine. Okay. All right. I'm going to switch cameras, and I'm going to use my document camera that most of you have seen me use for the finance videos. There we go. If I wind up off camera, please let me know. I've got it, my little setup here. I'm usually pretty good at staying on camera, but let me know if I wander off and you can't see what I'm doing, or if I'm not doing something big enough. Okay. So I am not going to review calculating marginal cost or finding the profit maximizing quantity or maximum profit, because we've done that for 2 days already. And I have now recorded videos for that. So we're going to drive on from there to try to wrap up chapter 11, hopefully get through chapter 12 today. But just very briefly, what we've been talking about is a firm that has a total cost function that is something like this, right? Which means they have an increasing cost function, right? So total cost is 1,000 plus 20Q plus 1/10 Q squared, right? And so that total cost function winds up looking something like this, right? Because it starts at 1,000, which is kind of what we've been used to, right? Which is the fixed cost. And then it increases with the variable cost. And this is our variable cost. It's variable because we have Q's here, right? So as Q increases, the variable cost portion is going to increase, right? So the gap between fixed cost and total and the total cost curve is the total variable cost. So we've been operating with that assumption. And then our total revenue was assumed to be some constant price, because we were assuming we're a very small firm in a very large market. In other words, we are facing perfect competition. So our assumption was.
Veronica?
Yes, sir.
The camera's out of focus.
How's that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if I can lock that. Still in focus?
Yes.
Okay, good. So we're assuming some sort of total revenue, where it's basically price times quantity. So let's say in this case, that's like 100 is the price. And it's a constant, total revenue curve. So this looks like what we did in finance, where we had a straight line for a total revenue curve. So it goes up something like that, right? And so what we're looking for, we have our break even here. So we're looking for that profit maximizing quantity, right? That will maximize our profits. Okay, so we have this. And then if we are looking at that from the perspective of price and quantity, this would be total revenue, total cost. And instead we're looking at the individual price of a individual unit, right? Our price is going to be some constant, right? So it's a constant number, and it is equal to the marginal revenue. We talked about this before. And it is equal to the demand. So our demand function, because we are in a perfectly competitive environment, our demand function is horizontal. It is perfectly elastic. um, Now, that said, we have a marginal cost in this case would be 20 plus 1/5 Q, right? So that would mean that if this is 100, if price is 100, then our marginal cost starts here and goes up in a straight line, because this is a linear function, goes up in a straight line. And it tells us what the profit maximizing quantity would be when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So when the marginal revenue crosses the marginal cost, that is our profit maximizing quantity. So we've done all this already. Okay. So that's just kind of to bring us up to speed. Now, if we have that firm, right, and we have we have our average total cost is going to look something like this, right? This is average total cost, price and quantity. So our average total cost starts high and falls down, right? Why does it do that? If we take our average total cost is our total cost divided by quantity, right? And so if we take this total cost function, we divide the whole thing by Q, right? Then we have initially at, say, a Q of 1, right? Average total cost would then be 1,000 divided by Q plus 20 plus 1/10 Q. It would initially start very high. Like if Q was 1, we'd have 1,000 divided by 1 plus 20 plus 1/10 of 1. So it's like 1,020. But as when we hit to 2, right, we have 1,000 divided by 2. That's going to be 500 plus 20, 520, plus 1/10 of, sorry, that should be 2/5, not 1/10. No, I'm sorry. Looking at the wrong stuff. 1/10 Q squared. Sorry, Q. Yeah. 1/10 Q. So at 2, we've got 1,000 divided by 2 is 500, plus 20 is 520, plus 1/10 of 2, 0.2. So we've got 520. So we've dropped from 1,020, right, to 520 just by going from 1 to 2, from a quantity of 1 to 2. So it's going to decrease, but as we saw in class, as Q gets bigger and bigger, this shrinks to near 0, right? So when we hit 1,000, Q goes to 0, but as we hit 1,000, this becomes 100, because now it's 1/10 times 1,000 is 100. So as this term goes down, this term simultaneously is increasing. So we have this initial effect where this term is primarily influencing the shape of the curve, and then eventually it approaches 0, and this term takes over and starts bringing us back up again. Okay. So we've got this average total cost curve that's initially comes down and then goes back up again. If we look strictly at our average variable cost, which is just this portion of the total cost curve, it goes from, it would be 20Q plus 1/10 Q squared, all divided by Q. So you get AVC is equal to 20 plus 1/10 Q, right? So we wind up with a curve that starts low and goes up and eventually kind of catches up, right, with the average total cost. So it gradually rises and eventually becomes with a big enough Q, right? They become almost indistinguishable. Now, what's interesting about the marginal cost curve is the marginal cost curve comes up, and in this case, it's a straight line, comes up through the, and if I drew this better, it comes up through the low point of the average total cost curve. So an important thing to remember, the marginal cost crosses the average total cost curve at its lowest point. Okay, so I realize my drawing's not perfect, but you want to imagine that I drew that so that the marginal cost curve crosses the average total cost curve at its lowest point. So you know visually when you look at the average total cost curve that wherever the marginal cost curve crosses it, that is in fact its lowest point. All right. So why do we care about that? Well, for a couple of reasons. One is in the long run, in the long run, the firm is only going to produce at a price above its average total cost. So if we have a price, so if P is equal to here, right? And again, P is equal to marginal revenue and represents the demand function in a perfectly competitive environment, right? We have a straight line here, right? We set our quantity where our marginal cost equals our marginal revenue, which is also where in the perfectly competitive environment, where marginal cost equals price, and that determines our Q, right? When we draw that line down, that becomes our Q. When we draw that line down from where marginal cost crosses marginal revenue, we draw it down, and where it hits the average total cost, we can draw a line across, and that becomes our average total cost per unit for our production. Okay, so let's say this is 100, right? So price is 100. I'm just going to make something up. This is say 50, right? So, and let's say this is 100. The quantity is 100. At a quantity of 100, and bear in mind, this does not match up with the numbers that I just did. I'm just making up numbers to make this easy for us to talk about. The cost per unit, the average cost per unit for the 100 products is 50. So this box becomes the cost to the firm of producing 100 units. So that cost is going to be 50 times 100, or 5,000. The firm's total profit is the whole box. Sorry, not the profit, but the total revenue is the whole box, right? So we've got revenue. Total revenue is going to be price times quantity. So the price is 100, not 1,000, 100. My hand is going away without my, past my mouth. 100 times 100 times 100, hand still wants to write 1,000, equals 10,000, right? So my revenue is 10,000. That's the volume of this box, right? Or the area of this whole box, minus my cost, which is the 5,000. So my profit is 10,000 minus 5,000 or 5,000. Just easy numbers to work with. I get my total cost again by drawing the line down from where the marginal cost curve touches the or crosses the price or marginal revenue line, right? That gives me my quantity. And where that line crosses the average total cost curve, I draw a line across, back across, and I say, okay, that is my average total cost, and that then gives me my total cost. So my profit is the uncolored box, right? Because my total revenue is the whole thing. My cost is this bottom rectangle. My profit is that. All right. I'm going to ignore the variable cost for a second and just draw average total cost, marginal cost. And again, that's supposed to be the bottom, but I'm drawing poorly. And then, so our price was up here, right? And we made 10,000 in profit. Say that's 100. But if our price falls, if price falls, say to here at say 75, right? The firm, this is my price equals marginal revenue, right? Equals demand. Here's my price equals marginal revenue equals demand. So that's P1. Here's P2. So we've fallen from 100 to 75. We were going to produce here at Q1. Now we're going to look where the marginal revenue crosses the marginal cost, or excuse me, marginal cost crosses the marginal revenue line. And we fall, now we make fewer units. We go from Q1 to Q2. Okay. So we make fewer units because our price is lower. So it's not worth it to us to make as many units as before, right? We still have, so we still do the same thing. We look where to find the quantity, the profit maximizing quantity, we look where MC equals MR. We find that here, right? We draw a line down, and where that line crosses the average total cost curve, we then draw another line across. That becomes our average total cost, right? And now this becomes our total cost, that rectangle. This becomes our total revenue, right? So maybe that's, we go from Q1 of 100 to Q2 of say 60, right? So now we have, and let's say the price is now, or cost per unit is now 55, right? We now have total revenue of 75 times 60, right? Because that's the price we're currently getting, 75. And at a price of 75, we're willing to make 60 units. Our total cost is going to be 55 per unit times 60. Right, so we have, I don't know what this is, 20. I need my calculator. So we have 75 times 60, 4,500, and then 55 times 60, 3,300. So 4,500 minus 3,300 is 1,200, right? We now make 1,200 in profit as opposed to what we made before. But what you can see is the quantity is decreasing as a result of the price going down. So we were producing here. As the price went down, we went to here. So let me do that one last time, and I'll get to my point. So again, average total cost. Let me see if I can draw my marginal cost would look something like that. That's a little better, right? Let's say our price now falls to right here, where it is just tangent to the average total cost, which is also right, which is also where the marginal cost crosses the average total cost. So we've got this intersection between the marginal cost and the marginal revenue, and it's happening at the bottom of the average total cost. So the price now is exactly equal to the average total cost. So ATC equals P, right? So what does that mean? So now we're going to produce at this Q, we'll say Q3. So we've previously been here and here, right? So we had been at Q2 and then, maybe out, I don't know, this is not well drawn, but we went from Q1 to Q2, now Q2 to Q3, right? Where the average total cost is exactly equal to the price. So let's say that ATC equals price is equal to, say, I don't know, 50, 50, whatever. It doesn't matter. Then our total revenue, and let's say this is now, and let's say Q is 50 and this is 50, right? We have 50 times 50 for our total revenue is 2,500. Total cost is also 50 times 50 equals 2,500. So we are making zero profit, right? So at that point, you are now, as a business, indifferent between continuing or shutting down, right? In the long run. Okay, so keep that in mind. In the long run, this is the point when average total cost equals price. This is the point at which we are thinking about stopping running our business. Now, in economic terms, average total cost includes what we call a normal profit. Okay. So at points above the average total cost, we are making abnormal profits, or profits above. And the definition of a normal profit would be based on the riskiness of the a profit adequate to compensate for risk. So, for example, if another investment of this sort would have a likely 10% return based on risk, this would also have a 10% return. That's incorporated into your average total cost. So nobody runs a business without making some sort of profit. The idea here is that at this point, right, where the price is equal to average total cost, we are making that, just 10%. We're not making 11 or 20%. Out here, we're making abnormal profit. So if most companies in this business are making 10%, but we're out here making 20%, that would be an abnormal level of profit. So, we've looked at like hospitals. Most hospitals make a profit of somewhere around, 5%. That's normal profit for a hospital. An abnormal profit would be 10% for a hospital. Okay. So at Q3, where price is equal to average total cost and and marginal cost, we're making that whatever the industry average is for profit, that's wedged into our average total cost. The profits that we talk about, right, when we're talking about out here, where, if we were operating at Q2 and we're, making this wedge of profit, that's abnormal profits. That would be like a hospital making 10% profit. All right. That's a little bit confusing, but just kind of bear in mind that it's normal to have some level of profit. When we talk about excess profit, or when we talk about, and I just call it profit, we're really talking about excess profit or abnormal profit. So most businesses, and we'll get to this in chapter 12, when businesses are making abnormal profits, it tends to attract other businesses into the industry, and that drives down price, right? Because when other businesses enter the industry, that drives down price through competition. That drives down price because the competition will offer their services at a lower price until the profits are all squeezed out. All the abnormal profits are squeezed out. Now, what do we do if the price falls below average total cost? So this is P, let's call that P4, that's P3, P4, and P4, right, is less than average total cost. So in the long run, if P4 stays down below average total cost, you're going to shut down your business because you're losing money every time you make a unit. Because you're producing at a cost that exceeds the price that you're actually getting. And you can see that. So here, the price crosses the marginal cost curve here. Draw a line up to the average total cost curve. And now the price is down here, right? That's how much we're collecting. This is our revenue, but this is our total cost. So you can see total cost, the big rectangle, is bigger than this is our total revenue. So this would be, in the long run, we wouldn't do that. We would shut down. In the short run, this is really messy, so I'm going to change it over. This is 4. So I'm going to average total cost. Now I'm going to bring back my variable cost, average variable cost, and marginal cost. Okay. So when my price is right here, right, this is as low as I'm going to go long run. Right. I'm going to produce this quantity, right, and it's going to be, I'm going to have no abnormal profit. So my profit is going to be TR minus TC is equal to 0. Right? This is actually normal in a competitive market. We don't make any excess profit, right? Our total cost includes a wedge of profit that's appropriate for our industry. So again, like a hospital, in the hospital industry, the appropriate profit is like 5%. Now, I said if price falls down here, so this was 3, this is say P4, right? So price falls again. In the short run, we'll now make Q4, right? We're going to make fewer, right? In the short run, our total costs are here, but our variable cost, so average total cost, average variable cost is down here. This is our price, right? So our price is above our average variable cost, but below our average total cost. So average variable cost is anything that changes, right? Is the average cost for anything that changes. So it's our supplies, Maybe it's our electricity. It depends on, what kind of thing we're doing, but it changes with quantity, right? What is included in average total cost that's not included in average variable cost? Shoot me a chat. What's accounted for in average total cost that's not accounted for in average variable cost? Good. Fixed costs, right? Very good. All right, I see it coming in. Takes a little pause. So the difference between the average variable cost and the average fixed cost, right, is my average total cost and average variable cost is my average fixed costs. There's nothing you can do about, in the short run, there's nothing you can do about your fixed cost, right? Let's say in the short run, you've got to pay your rent. You can't walk away from your rent. Maybe you have a lease for 3 more months. So you've got to pay that rent. So at Q4, you're bringing in enough revenue to exceed your variable costs per unit. So let's say at Q4, your price is equal to, I don't know, 40. Your average variable costs are 30, but your average total costs are 70, right? So at price of 40, average variable cost of 30, we have a contribution margin of 10. Right? Remember that from way back in what is that, like chapter 6, I think, of Kapinski, right? We had a contribution margin of 10. So for every unit that we make, we're earning 10 more than it costs us to make it, just in terms of pure variable cost. So that 10 goes towards the 40, right? 70 minus 30, our average fixed cost is 40, right? So that 10 is going towards paying the fixed costs. So we're not going to make enough to pay our rent, but we can reduce the amount that we owe, right? So it makes sense to keep producing, at least in the short run, as long as your price is above your average variable cost. When your price falls to P5, and you can see now P5 is below both the average total cost as well as the average variable cost. Now you're bringing in a price of, say, P5 is going to equal, say, 25. Now you're getting $25 for something that costs you, in terms of variable costs you $30, right? So you're losing $5 every time you make one, never mind trying to cover your expenses. So when in the long run, when price is less than average total cost, all right, let me do this. So the rule is long run, shut down when price is less than average total cost. Short run, shut down when price is less than average variable cost, right? And average total cost is going to be greater than average variable cost, right? Because average total cost is equal to average fixed cost plus average variable cost. So it's always going to be bigger. Average total cost is always going to be bigger than average variable cost. All right, how are we doing? Is that making sense? Want me to go over something again on that? I know it's a lot of stuff all at once. So give me, like, if you feel like you're pretty good, give me a smiley face. If you want me to do something, give me a question mark. You can send it to me individually instead of to the whole group if you're embarrassed that you don't understand what's going on. And I won't call you out. All right, I'm seeing all smiley faces. You guys are all liars. They just want to be done. All right. All right. So that's the rule, right? So you're looking for, right? You've got the average total cost curve, the average variable cost curve. The marginal cost curve goes through the average total cost curve, and if the average variable cost has a low point, the marginal cost goes through the average variable cost also at its low point, right? And so as price ratchets down, right, as price goes down, the first stopping point we have is where price reaches the bottom of the average total cost curve. That then hits our first rule, which is when the price goes below the average total cost, long run, we're going to shut down. So as soon as the price goes below the average total cost curve, we're going to start looking at, okay, how do we get out of our lease? We tell our landlord we're not going to renew our lease, whatever we can do to start cutting fixed costs. We start laying off people, whatever that is. And then our next shutdown condition is as the price keeps going down, when it hits the bottom of the average variable cost curve, right? At that point, you're actually losing money every time you make another product, right? So between the average total cost and the average variable cost, you're not making enough money to pay your fixed costs, all of them, but you are making enough money to cover making one more unit. So you have between the average total cost and the average variable cost, right? When the price is between those two curves, you have a positive contribution margin, right? And anything above the bottom of the average variable cost, you have a positive contribution margin. Up here, you have a great big positive contribution margin. Down here, you have just enough contribution margin to cover your fixed costs. Below that, you no longer have enough contribution margin to cover all of your fixed costs, but it's better to cover some of your fixed costs than not cover any of them. So you keep producing until you get to the point where the price reaches the bottom of your average variable cost curve. And when it goes below the average variable cost curve, then you're going to shut down immediately, right? Because at that point, you're losing money on every product you make. All right. Well, let's see. That's 5. That's 6. I will scan these in for what they're worth. I'll scan them in, and you can have access to them. Let me just check my notes because I know I'm out of order on what I'm doing. Let's see. Okay. I think last point for chapter 11 is this. Just going to do the average total cost. In the long run, the lowest quantity and price that a firm will take is where the price hits the bottom of the average total cost curve. So we just went through that whole thing. So that gives us a point, right? And then if the price goes up, the firm will produce Q1, Q2, right? The firm will produce at the point where the price curve crosses the marginal cost curve, right? And this is where MR, remember, this is always true. MR equals P, MR equals P, right? And then if it goes up again, MR equals P, right? So this is P3, right? We get P3, Q3. If I took and drew that without the average total cost curve and marginal cost curve, I would have Q1, Q2, Q3, P1, P2, P3. What does that look like? And that's actually that is the marginal cost curve, but what other curve does that look like? Is the camera out of focus again? supply curve, exactly. Hey, if the camera goes out of focus, just unmute and say, hey, fix the camera, okay? Because I'm not constantly looking over. So it's the supply curve, right? This is the firm supply curve. All right, the firm supply curve is actually its marginal cost curve above the average total cost. So it begins where the average total cost crosses the marginal cost and then goes up along the marginal cost curve. Right? So as price goes up, quantity goes up, right? The supply curve is always up and to the right, right? Marginal cost up and to the right. So the firm supply, if you will, the firm supply curve is its marginal cost curve. All right. All right. I think that's everything for chapter 11. So give me 2 seconds here to push my notes out of the way. Grab my chapter 12 notes. 7. All right, so I'll post all these notes onto paper. I'll post all those notes. I'll scan them and post them for what they're worth. Okay, now we're going to move to chapter 12. And like I said, if the camera goes out of focus, just unmute and say, hey, focus the camera. No, I will not be upset. I'm not constantly looking at the chat boxes. Here, let me see if I can move that over. Yeah, that'll be more obvious to me. All right. Okay, so there are 3 principles in chapter 12, and I'm going to hit them fairly quickly. They're kind of cool. I think they're kind of cool. So imagine you've got a firm like Pfizer, right? Pfizer is what kind of firm? Just checking to see if you're awake. Pharma, good. All right. Thank you, Mohammed. So imagine Pfizer is producing Lipitor, which is a cholesterol busting drug. Okay. And they have that Pfizer has 2 factories. They have one factory that has a marginal cost of 5 plus 5Q. So MC1 is 5 plus 5Q. Factory 2, the marginal cost is 20 plus 2Q. So if we were to draw on graph the marginal cost for the 2 factories, we'd have one that starts at 5, right, and goes up at a slope of 5, right? So slope of 5. And then we have another one that starts at 20, but goes up at a slope of 2. Right? So we have one that's doesn't cost much to start up, right? So this factory has a relatively low fixed cost, right? So fixed cost per unit. This factory has a relatively high, starts with a relatively high marginal cost, but then increases at a relatively low rate. So let's say that the price of Lipitor starts out at 10. How many units, so jot this down, how many units of Lipitor would Pfizer make, given its two factories? So it doesn't have to run a factory if it's not profitable to do so. That's kind of the thing to remember here. So remember from the last chapter, we're assuming right now that we're facing a perfectly competitive market and the price is 10. So to find the profit maximizing quantity, right, you're going to set, and this, right, P is equal to MR in that case. So you always want to find where MR equals MC. That's the rule for finding the profit maximizing quantity. So what you want to do in this case is you want to look at the profit maximizing quantity for each of the factories. And if that's a negative number, then you're going to do 0. All right. So if my MR is equal to 10, right, I'm going to take MC1. I'm going to say 10 equals 5 plus 5Q, right? Subtract 5 from both sides. I get 5 equals 5Q, and Q equals 1. So at a price of 10, Q is equal to 1. Over here, I've got 10 equals 20 plus 2Q. I would subtract, right, 10 equals 20 plus 2Q. When I subtract 20, I get negative 10 equals 2Q. If I've got a negative Q, I'm not going to do anything. That would be negative 5, right? So I'm not going to make any. So I'm not going to run factory 2, right? This is factory 2. This is factory 1. At a price of 10, I'm not going to run factory 2. I'm just going to leave it sitting empty, right? What do I do if the price? What does Pfizer do if the price jumps to 30 though? So at 30, remember, MR equals MC. So we're going to look at each factory's MC. We're going to set them both equal to the MR. So the MR is the price, that's 30. And for factory 1, it's going to be 5 plus 5Q. For factory 2, it's going to be 30 equals 20 plus 2Q. And just visually looking here, you can see, all right, I'm going to make something here, and I'm going to make something here, all right? Yeah, good, Andre, 5, right? So for factory 1, factory 2, right, I solve the equation. I say, okay, that's 25 equals 5Q, Q equals 5. So factory 1 is going to make 5. Factory 2, 30 minus 20 is 10. 10 equals 2Q. Q equals 5. So factory 2 is going to make 5. So Pfizer's total production will be 5 and 5. 5 out of factory 1, 5 out of factory 2. Right? All right. Now, what if the price goes to say 50, right? And that's not going to be a good visual effect here, but if the price goes to 50 now, right? So we've got my factories, 5, slope of 5, 20, slope of 2. So let's say right, that's 50, and my marginal cost over here was 5 plus 5 cube. MC1, MC2 is 20 plus 2Q, right? So we just set them again equal to, right? Set MC equal to P, which is equal to MR, because it's a perfectly elastic demand curve. So we get 50 equals 5 plus 5Q, and 50 equals 20 plus 2Q. Right, so we're going to wind up with this and with this, right? Q and Q. So we get 45 equals Q, 5Q. So Q equals 9. And over here we get 30 equals 2Q, and Q equals 15. So we get 15 and 9. So at a price of 50, Pfizer is going to make 24 units. It's going to make 9 of it in this relatively high marginal cost facility, and it's going to make 15 in its probably more automated factory over here, right? So this is an example. So manufacturing is a great example of this, because you have you can have a lot of automation and do and make a huge amount with very little marginal cost, especially if that marginal cost is labor, right? But if you have a super automated factory, think of like Toyota factory down in North Carolina. It's mostly robots putting the cars together with people kind of overseeing the robots. But if you go to if you go to I think I've used this example before in class. If you go to the Lamborghini factory, it's mostly the crafts people hand making the cars, right? So much less automation, much more individual effort. You could think of this as kind of like a mom and pop store in a small town versus Walmart, right? Walmart can make tons of stuff really cheaply if they can get enough at a high enough price. If they can get a high enough price, they can just really provide a lot of high level of quantity, right? And that's how they kind of beat out a lot of the mom and pop stores. All right, so that is kind of principle one, is the allocation of production will move across different production facilities depending on the price and marginal cost of production. Now, here's the interesting thing. The example I just used a second ago is mom and pop store versus Walmart. These don't have, I gave the example, we built the example around it being Pfizer, right? But it could actually be two separate companies, which I think is kind of cool, because that the market then decides how much each of them makes, right? By providing them a price. And then the entrepreneurs who run each of the facilities will look at their marginal cost curves and decide, where is my profit maximizing quantity? And so factory one, if that's owned by, say, Ariana over here, and this one's owned by Anna, right? Ariana will look at okay, a price of 50, I'll make 9. Anna will look at it, say a price of 50, I'll make 15, and the market winds up getting 24 units, even if they're not part of the same company. Okay. So that's principle 1 from chapter 12. Principle 2 kind of goes to what we were just talking about at the end of chapter 11 as I was closing up. When, if we've got a firm facing price equals marginal revenue, right, over here, right, and a firm over here, firm 1, firm 2, right, and let's say these are industries. So let's say this is pharma, and this is long-term care, right? So we've got Pfizer over here, Genesis over here, right? If this is what the average participant in the market sees, right, over here is the price has been competed down to where the price is just equal to average total cost. Over here, we're not making any abnormal profits. We're making just normal profits. That's built into our average total cost. But over here, right, firms in this market, firm 1, the pharma firms are making this big chunk of abnormal profit. So investors who are over here look over here, or entrepreneurs who are over here look over here and say, hey, the pharma guys are making a whole boatload of money. Over here, we're just kind of getting by. We're just getting just enough to stay in business over here. What is the incentive for the entrepreneurs who are working in long-term care then? What are they likely to do? You can unmute and just shout it out if you want. What would you do? You have money tied up in long-term care, right? Let's say you're an investor. You don't even have to be the entrepreneur. You're just an investor. And you look and you say, okay, Genesis is making me, say 10% returns, but the guy over here is making 25% returns. Exactly. You're going to move the money out of long-term care and into pharma. So what will happen is more investors will throw money at pharma, and what we will get is industry entry. Right? We've talked about this in management. We've talked about it in econ in this class as well as in finance. When there's abnormal profits to be had in one industry, people will tend to leave the industry that's making less profit and move their investments to the industry that's making more profits. So what we'll see is entrepreneurs and investors looking to enter the pharma market and make more pharmaceuticals, right? What will happen as firms enter the pharmaceutical market? What will happen to price? It'll go down. Good, Andre. Good, Mohammed. So as firms enter, right, price will go from P1 to P2, right, until, right, we get bid down to where P equals ATC, right? So there is a constant pressure in the market to reallocate resources from industries that are either losing money or are just making average returns to industries that make money. So this is what they call the invisible hand principle. Well, it's actually principle two and three. So one is above average profits will attract entry, right, from lower profit industries. And the entry, and so that's principle two. Principle three is entry will drive down profits in the more profitable market until they reach uh, the normal profit range. So if normal profit over in pharmaceuticals, it could be more than long-term care, right? It is in fact a riskier business to be in, right? For those of you that are taking finance, right? Pharmacy the pharmaceutical industry is a risky business. It costs a lot of money to develop a drug. And most of the drugs that you develop never go to market. Never make it. They don't actually work, right? So you'll spend hundreds of millions of dollars and then they don't get out to market. Okay, sorry. So it could be that normal profits in pharmacy are 15%, right, based on risk, and normal over here is 10%, right, based on risk. So what will happen is, people will exit the long-term care industry and enter the pharma industry until the abnormal profits are bid down to their normal level of 15% based on the risk involved. All right. That's chapter 12. I told you 12 would go fairly quick. And I think they do a pretty good job explaining it in the textbook as well. So that's chapter 12. So we've done 11 and 12. Next time we're going to start 13. I'm going to, hopefully between now and Wednesday, I'll have time to write up some practice problems that I'd like to ask on the exam. Let me see. And I'm back. So I'll try to write up some problems like you'll see on the exam, post those. At a minimum, I'll have them by the end of the week for the chapters that we've done so far. We'll start 13 next time. So your homework for 11 and 12 will be due, the LEAP pad will be due Wednesday before class. All right, any questions regarding econ specifically? And then if there are, and then we'll switch to talking very briefly about internships. So questions about econ, where we're at, what we're doing. Feel free to unmute to just ask direct, or you can type it. I'm going to give it, there's a little bit of a lag in the chat, I think so. Okay, so after today, as soon as we're done, I am going to upload the recording to YouTube. I'll put it as a private video, and then I'll put the link in the Canvas. I'll scan these pages if they're useful to you. You'll have access to those as well. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. Okay, for the test, is it an open book exam? Yes, it's gonna, there's no way for me to stop you from making it an open book exam. So for the test, I'm going to assume that you have access to your notes, to the textbook, Google. The only thing I expect of you is that you don't talk to each other. And I can't stop you from doing that, but that would not be appropriate, would not be the kind of thing that you should do as a young professional. I still will give a retake opportunity. So, you know, it's an independent exercise, but it is going to be presumed to be open book. Any other? Also, is it timed? Yes, it's going to be timed. It's going to be timed. It's going to be at a specific time. And so you'll have, I think, 2 hours is my intention. So it will be timed. It will be open book. It will be on Canvas, and I will be running at the same time. I will be on Zoom during that period of time. That's part of why I want to do it at a given time. Is I will be on Zoom. So as you're taking the test, you'll be able to log on. If you run into a question, you'll be able to Zoom. Join a Zoom with me and say, "Hey, I don't understand problem 3. Can you explain that better?" Um, and uh, so that's my intention there. Any other questions about econ? Because we'll switch to in, internships after that. All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to stop.